Gurman Bhatia, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Cesar Jung-Harada, and there's Jodie Loi, both coming from Singapore. And where are you located right now?
I am based in Delhi, India. And yeah, I was born and raised here. And after being in multiple places, work, education, now I'm back here. So yeah, joining from India.
Thanks so much. So, in a nutshell, what do you do nowadays? Like, what is your occupation nowadays?
Okay. I have like 2, 3 slides I can show to explain that. It might be helpful to have visual cues. So I'm a generalist pretty much. These days, all I do is write emails, but in a formal life, I used to be a journalist. So my career went from journalism to data journalism to graphics journalism to data whiz and information design. That's sort of been the trajectory. As time moved forward, wait, I'll have a visual for this. So as time moved forward, life became less of journalism and more of management and just writing emails, as I said. I currently run my own company, which is called Revisual Labs. It's an information design studio and web development agency. We work with all sorts of clients to take their data driven research and make it approachable for audiences of different kinds through visuals, but also sometimes through words. The idea is to work within the space of data communication as opposed to analysis and other things, if that puts it in context.
That's awesome. What I can notice is that the data analysis side is the only constant one. And then you mentioned that you are trying to do reporting and not taking opinion. So are these two things connected? The fact that you are doing analysis, but at the same time not taking position?
I think in order to tell the story, you have to sort of understand the data, and that's where the analysis bit comes in. Unless and until I really understand why do I need to explain this, or why is it worth communicating, which is where the analysis comes in. No? You may have, so currently, for example, we are working on a health dashboard for an association, and within that, while I'm making the charts, I need to be mindful and I need to explain to the client that these two regions are not comparable, because this region has data only for one country, whereas this region has data for all countries. And unless and until you have that analysis mind always on, that what is this number trying to show, you can't do data communication. And that's where it sort of comes in, that understanding of data comes in. Yeah. But just to put, sorry to
Mhm.
cut you off. But just to put it in context of like what work can look like, the work is into this on the intersection of three things, which is data, code, and design, and that can mean multiple things. Because sometimes it's like I'll take a number in a press release, write some code, and make a long line of tractors to talk about the scale of a protest that happened in Delhi couple of years ago. Um, you know, because the police might say 5,000 tractors showed up, but what does the 5,000 mean? And then sometimes, it might mean taking a database of songs and turning into, an analysis of how something may have changed. So in industry, funnily enough, was dominated by women, but isn't so anymore. Um, or in talking about the environment, this project where we had made a nice little room, one of my colleagues at Reuters made a nice room for a camera. So what you see, this was created on the top of the rooftop of the Reuters bureau in Delhi. And he got a carpenter, put a cover on so that it would be protected in rain, and placed a camera nicely inside. And the camera clicked a picture of the skyline every hour. Um, this location also had a sensor nearby, AQI sensor, a PM 2.5 sensor nearby. So, what ultimately I was able to do was combine the images and do a time lapse where you could see the PM 2.5 with the photograph. And this is where I think the storytelling part comes in. which is where, you can make a line chart of PM 2.5 and it will tell one story, but you combine it with the visual, then it becomes more visceral and it's much more relatable and easy to understand what the difference might mean. Now, as I do more of agency work, we work with all sorts of clients. Sometimes they will give us flow charts that are of how they conducted a study, and we will turn it into a nice little Sankey. Sometimes they will say we have all these numbers about humanitarian aid that we need to compare. And we think, okay, can we turn them into boxes of aid and, just make it a little more approachable? So, yeah, those are like some scattered examples. Yeah.
Wonderful. And it's very impressive that you put the camera and then you also like add the text. It's a lot of storytelling. So my next question is to go deeper into that aspect.
Yeah.
So the climate change is here, and now you have more and more people who have managed to spin a narrative, even though the science is clear, and they deny the existence of climate change, and they act as if tomorrow and next generation don't matter. And
Yeah.
so now we still have to fight. We still have to fight for the truth, and you still have to fight to go in the right direction. So why do you think, or why do you care about the climate data, and how can we use climate data to change the situation?
I think in the last couple of years, from a data visualization or data communication point of view, we have seen a surge because of two subjects. One was COVID, and the other is climate change. They really forced us to look at metrics every day. For example, I live in Delhi. We are fortunate or unfortunate enough to have one of the worst airs in the world. And that means that weather report is not just about min and max and precipitation. It's always accompanied with AQI. And the fact that we have that data available sparks that conversation. So it's a little personal because I get to breathe the same. I think climate change is that if we go deep down into it, it's personal experience that's going to change how we live. Whether that's the air we breathe, the food we eat, everything is going to evolve and change because of this. And if you were to look at what Ed Hawkins' work, of course, if, this group of people has been seeing the climate stripes and things like that, may or may not be in this deck, in this particular deck. But it was that fact that as soon as you saw the climate stripes, you knew what they were about. I think that thing exists because of the fact that it was personal. Because here I could go in and pick in my city and be like, for the longest time, my Zoom background was that, right? It was the climate stripes for Delhi. The fact that you can do things like that, the data can be that granular. It is available. We have satellites that are capturing this data. So you can create all sorts of things and that can spark that conversation. I think that's where that data side of things has been enabled by that conversation. Whether that changes things, how that changes things, is a sustained effort, of course. The fact that we look at projections and the latest IPCC charts and be like, okay, um, things are as bad as they can be. You're able to say they're as bad as they can be because you are looking at that chart where it says, okay, we've exceeded 1.5. That's it, right? All projections, all methods, all methodologies, in all of them we have exceeded 1.5. So that is a data driven conversation we are having. It's not like saying in ambiguous terms that something is going wrong. We have evidence that things have gone wrong. We have evidence with different methodologies that things have gone wrong.
But then the data and the representation, it is important, but
Yes,
it's
it
not
is
enough,
important.
right? So you're talking about storytelling, but could you give me an example of, or maybe, I don't know if you measure that, or if you are trying to like, or if you evaluate it even like a sort of a empirically, but which work that you have done that you feel had the most emotional impact or like actually change policy Which work do you feel had been the most impactful? Maybe to your surprise. Which one were the most surprisingly successful to you?
I think in terms of policy, it's very hard to know that this one piece
Hmm.
policy change happens when a series of conversations happen. It's never just about a single piece. The This pollution thing that I was showing earlier, I think this one did definitely have an emotional impact, because you had looked at it many times just as the line chart. And I know this is not the first time someone did this. In China, in Beijing, another artist had like sort of clicked pictures every day from their window. Let's see if I can pull it up. I'll have it in some deck somewhere, but we have seen this technique used before. But whenever you use a picture as opposed to, or a picture in combination with the data, or you take something and turn it visual, right? I can write the PM 2.5 went from 100 to 300. I can make a line chart where I see the rate of increase. It has a different impact. I have a picture which shows before and after. It has a different sort of impact. So I think storytelling does help the drive the point stronger. Storytelling also helps in retention of information. So it stays with you longer than numbers. People forget numbers. Data is incredibly important to make a point, and but in a world where we are inundated with numbers, you need something to stand out. And I think storytelling plays that role, where it has the potential to help your number stay memorable, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. That's super helpful. So you'd say this one is a powerful one. So we are in the process of building this big climate data repository, or at least like a sort of a directory of linking to like important things and then duplicating this information to keep it alive. So very quickly it can get quite complicated and people can get confused. The amount of data, it's all different format, different topic. Um, my understanding is that because this information is so rich, you sort of have to make choices of what you show, what you don't show, and the way that you show it. Do you have some tricks or some like key ways and attributes that make people click, that make people remember, that touches people? What are the things that you know are the most effective for people to remember and ideally take action?
So I think in order two things, I have a framework to help think about this in terms of data driven storytelling. So you can do two things. You can either build visualizations in tools, or experiences that are meant for exploration. So typically when you look at a dashboard, it's meant for exploration. No dashboard is to tell a story. You have free form, you can use filters. I want to look it into only one district or province, I can do that. I want to see what's happening in my city, I can do that. So that's for exploration. The other thing is about explanation, where you do more storytelling as opposed to enable people to do story finding. And your typical news report is that. Most of my work, at least as a journalist, was this. Um, Now, I think these are the pieces we sort of need clarity on when you want people to take action. There are two, three things you can do. If you're doing something that's more like a dashboard, you have to find ways to make it personal. So, for example, when I was covering COVID for Reuters, we built this dashboard, and a lot of things in this dashboard were relative. So what happens is, okay, if I say went to a country profile, I think that will be a good example. You both are in Singapore, we'll open Singapore. These are old numbers, of course, but when I looked at Singapore, it would tell me, okay, Singapore is here, but other places are here. That helps it be personal. allowing it for it in isolation means something, but for me to understand, okay, is it more than most, is it less than most, puts things into context. Who are, is it an outlier, is it not an outlier? So that is one small thing that you can do if you're doing exploration. Can you give rankings? Can you give what is that above the average, below the average? Put or above the median, below the median. Put things into context. Tell me what that number means when I look at that number. Another thing we did, for example, even in this dashboard, was we built a vaccination page um, in which we added this thing where you could look at different countries and what vaccine, how much vaccination they had done by the country's income. So you suddenly, immediately, even in a life tracker, saw the inequality that existed. So that's a choice you make in terms of storytelling. So even though it's a dashboard, you're doing some form of storytelling. So that's one thing that you can do that can enable action. The ability to dig deep, the ability to make comparisons, the ability to see relative things. That is in exploration. Even when I look at this and I'm able to say, dive deep into my particular country, I'm able to go to Asia and I'm able to pick India and I'm able to pick Delhi ultimately. New Delhi, it used to be there. So if I'm able to pick a particular city, that whole relative thing, okay, shift from here to here, and then I can switch back to global also. I can see maybe the switch for me is more stark than the world. So having that constant visual is also allowing for that. That is one thing. Now let's talk about explanation. That is the easy piece for you to feel things, because I few things that we do when we do more explanation stuff. Example chart. This is a chart where the goal is explanation. If the goal is explanation, what we'll do is we'll write a title that is the insight. So all the climate things where we are saying that we have exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius this year, like, it's we have exceeded that number. Now we are in deep trouble. In no scenario can we fix this immediately. So that should be your title, because that is the point the chart should make. So in this case, it gives you the insight. And then you see the visual. When I'm going into the visual, before going into the visual, I know what the visual is about. And that's how we do storytelling. Um, so yeah, so I would say most of the time where the idea is for people to feel things, if the idea is to make people take action, doing more storytelling will help. So if you create a repository that will enable more data products to come out, you need a mix of both dashboards that are data dumps where one can freely explore the data, as well as pointed stories about smaller themes or smaller communities with even human insight wherever possible, that this is what the data says, and this is how what we are seeing in the data has actually affected people's lives. When you combine the two, then it becomes much more memorable, much more powerful, much more useful in terms of getting impact from the work that you're doing, or just for your audience, for it to stay with the audience for a little longer. So something like this is pure exploration. Something like this that I showed you was just explanation. There's no exploratory component in this. Or you can have something that's somewhere in the middle. The example I showed of the COVID dashboard was somewhere in the middle. There is some storytelling element even in a dashboard, or it could be an explanatory story where you have one, exploration component in the end. So yeah, I would say this framework is important to think about when trying to answer that question.
That is super impressive. You basically give us like a full lecture. That's incredible. I'm so glad we asked you to share your screen. That is so much better. Yeah,
Yeah. This is these are some of my standard decks that I
yeah, yeah.
plan to put to explain.
Being a
But
visual communicator is a secret weapon. You definitely have skills. My last question is this: is that the kind of work that you do is, I think it's an incredible skill that most people don't realize is so critical for communicating and convincing and moving people's mind. Where can we find the community of people who are specialized in geodata and data visualization and mapping? Where do you go and find, like new plugin and new libraries and the community of people who are looking for jobs in this? Because for Safecast, we need, okay, that's
yeah, we have something. There are multiple places where you can go. This is a good one. So they also happen to have a Slack channel that you can join. I can maybe even show that what it looks like. Um, just give me 1 second. But basically, if you even went to my website, I have, in terms of how to get started, I have this nice page, data visualization, data journalism resources. I try and update it occasionally. As you can see, it's been a while, but some of the stuff still is relevant. So, for example, you were talking about community. This is what I mentioned, but there are other Slacks groups that you can also join. At the same time, there are books you can read. There are newsletters you can subscribe to. Data is Plural, for example, is a lovely newsletter that sends you 5 data sets every week. And at the same time, all the data sets they've shared so far exist as an Excel sheet. So you look excited looking at stuff like
sorry.
that. No, that's good. That's good. That means I'm sharing something useful. But yeah, so I think this page is might be a good starting point. Data Visualization Society, 100% is a good starting point. Their Slack will have, okay, I found it. Let's see, just to give you a teaser of what it looks like. So their Slack has all sorts of channels. People who are looking for freelance gigs might find work here. In terms of if they're location specific channels as well. So if there are people watching this who are in different parts of the world, may be able to connect with people and folks in their region doing this. At the same time, there are help channels where if you're stuck, you can ask for help. There are places where if you want just feedback, you can do that as well. So this is one place that I would recommend. Like somebody stuck with a thing and they're just asking, how can I do this better? So I think that is, and it's free to join. It has some 20,000 people from all across the world.
Mhm.
Uh, and yeah, it,
Yeah.
it, I think like just generally, and I'm sure this is also true for data folks, but nerds are nice and helpful people. Uh, so for that reason, if you are part of the database community in any
Mm,
form through these spaces, like people are quite helpful and they will
mm,
support you happily. Yeah.
mm. So I'm sure so many people came to ask you because you are so, front and center because your data visualization at Reuters, which is like, it's like the gospel, right? Like everybody's got to believe it's the truth, like Reuters. Um, and so I imagine so many people come to you. What is typically the mistake and the pitfall that we should avoid? Because I'm sure many people came before us and they ask you, want to do this thing, but then they do something really stupid and they were going to do something stupid. Like what are the common pitfalls when you do data visualization and trying to do information, sort of advocacy, or advocacy for neutral information, I should say,
I think one pitfall, as I said, is a lot of people make dashboards.
Mm,
Everything should be a dashboard. And if we have too many dashboards that aren't like as useful as they should be. many moons ago. I don't even know if I'll be able to find it now, but I made a graphic for this also, that when should you make a dashboard. And I think it's important that if the data is something that's going to be updated frequently, then maybe you do a dashboard. Found it thanks to LinkedIn. um but so basically it was this. Will it So first, you have to figure out that, does your audience need this? Is the data updated frequently? If it's updated, never updated, then it shouldn't be a dashboard. It should just be either in Excel or insights from that data that somebody can take and act on. But if it's something that is updated quite frequently, like real time data is there, then 100%, it does have that use case. So I think common pitfall is people make dashboards for the sake of making something, whereas what they should be doing is thinking more about narrative, stories, insights. The second pitfall might again be walking into it with a hypothesis that, or with the bias, and then having tortured the data to death to say what you wanted to say. There's a lovely book by someone called Alberto Cairo, who's a legend in data visualization, called How Charts Lie. I think that is also a great book for people to think about. um, just doing data visualization that is fair, honest, ethically in the right place. Because sometimes I think even why we don't intend to do misleading things, but we just happen to do them anyway, unknowingly, unconsciously. In the book, for example, Alberto Caro writes in depth about how cyclone maps are not as intuitive as they should be. The cone of uncertainty and all the things associated with it. So I think it's an interesting read, and I really recommend it. Um, that takes me to the third pitfall. Also, I think another key point to think about all of this is, how do we communicate uncertainty? As soon as we make something into a visual, no matter how concrete the data may seem, um, we don't communicate uncertainty that clearly in data still. So I think that's one thing to be extremely mindful of, because if you have confidence intervals, you have to show those in your charts. For example, if I know the sample size is small, I need to say the sample size is small. We should not let our audience walk away with a sense of something's too serious or too bad or not dangerous or casual without knowing, without communicating the degree of confidence or certainty with which we are saying this. So if there is any uncertainty attached to what you're saying, you should have it be part of what you're communicating. I think those are the few things that I would mention. Another piece I would say is, a lot of people will ask me also how to do this, how to do this, and then we end up in that rabbit hole of never actually doing it. So part of all of this is also just doing something and learning on the job. The first time you make a mistake is fine. Second time you'll make fewer mistakes. Third time you'll make fewer mistakes. So most of it is just, it's one of those things that you have to do to in order to get better at. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time. There are things like Tidy Tuesday that the R community does to, um, have people in the community play with the data set and make charts. Tableau people do makeover Mondays. Uh, there is something called a 30-day chart challenge, 30-day map challenge. There are all these places to practice and learn and try and fail. Um, and yeah, that is one thing. And I would also say, as soon as possible, whenever you feel like you're in a good, whatever you've created in a good place, put it out in the world. The world will help you make it better. It will not get better on its own on your computer. So I am one of those people who's like, just put your work out there, show it to people, as terrifying as it might be. Even today, I've been doing this for a decade. Even today, when I hit the publish button, I send a package to a client for deployment, I am terrified that something I've done has gone wrong. But I think it's important to trust the process, and yeah, and learn from our mistakes and the process itself, so that
Uh, That's very beautiful, but I still have one question. It will be short.
that's
So
fine.
you are so when you are dealing with data, you can see, as you mentioned, that actually I was watching this Oliver documentary where he's explaining the back end of how they do the TV. And he was explaining that when they do research, usually the data shows them that things are even worse than they actually appeared at the beginning, because they learn more about it. And it's just like, oh my God, it's terrible. And so as you're doing data analysis, I imagine it's similar. So because you're dealing with so much negative information as well, what gives you hope? Especially because you have to communicate with other people. So there's a dimension of, so what gives you hope in this whole process of working on this kind of topic?
I would, on a topic like climate change, I really don't know. I don't, on things like these, there is very little hope. So it's very hard to stay hopeful, based on everything that we are looking at. So I experienced something like this during COVID, which is a parallel I would draw to, that I was making these sheets about people dying. And the difference there is, I know there's a curve and the curve flattens out at some point. It might flatten out quickly or it might take time to flatten out, but so the science there told me that it is going to get better. How worse is it going to get before it gets better? We don't know. But still, despite it being that scenario, when I filled sheets of people dying every day, it was emotionally quite draining. You're making charts and you think, like, I'm not sitting there on the field, I'm not going to a crematorium and seeing how many people are being cremated every hour. I'm not experiencing all of that, and still this is so draining for me. I can't even imagine what those people are going through. So same thing for climate, right? So my life as a privileged person is not affected that much, in terms of, it is it will be in some degree or the other, but still I'm protected in the space that I am in. I don't have to work on the street and breathe the bad air all the time. I get to put an air purifier in my home. Similarly, I'm not a climate refugee. The people who really don't have water, so have to leave and move to another country. So I think the world is facing this issue and it's hard to stay positive. But the one thing I did in that direction was that I focused on what was my job in all of this. While the world is crashing, so to say, and this in this case it was COVID, I kept going by telling myself that my job is to make sure good information, trustworthy information that's easy to digest, is out there. Even if one person decides to stay home because of what I have done or the numbers that I've put out, and I've been able to communicate the science good well enough to make sure don't become super spreaders, maybe my job is done. And I think in climate change communication also, maybe we start thinking in that direction, that we can't change the world, but even if a small shift happens based on what we are doing, based on what we are communicating, it's worth it. So you ultimately just focus on what you are here to do and what you can do, and bring people together to maybe help do more of that, kind of what you're doing with the hackathon, that just gathering people for a common cause. I think that is the best we can do. Otherwise it's a little difficult to stay hopeful. Community helps, I think, in terms of that sense of, in a space of doom and gloom. uh, yeah.
That was perfect way of closing.
I have
Thank
one
you so much.
question.
Oh, okay, Gurman, go on.
It's not fair. I just so many times I want to ask questions, but I couldn't ask any questions. I have, which is like, okay, say for beginners like us, where there's just so much content about data visualization to like dive into, but we want a quick and easy way to get like a feel of how we should do it. You've given a framework with your storytelling, and story finding, but also maybe like metrics that we can look at to easily compare and ask ourselves the right questions as we create these data visualizations. Are there any that you suggest or recommend? Or like
Uh,
metrics and
in
scales. Yeah.
metrics as in, but what do you mean by metrics?
Uh, I feel like, for example, with UX, we have like lemmas, like, oh, the learnability of a certain product, memorability, etc. I think you've stated a few points that I think I can see are things that we should always consider with our data visualization. And I've also read in one of the articles you talk about, like, say, data ink ratio, or how is this going to be personal to somebody. So are there like questions that you always ask yourself before you release your data visualizations that you feel, oh, actually all of these are questions we should always be asking?
Okay, I have one framework for this. One second.
Of
Pulling it
course.
up. It's four things. Trying to find the right deck that may have it. One second. This one should
Take your time. I'll
Woman
close
has
the
air
record.
work.
The curve.
Okay.
Andy Kerr.
But so Andy Cook is also a data visualization expert, and what he says are these three things, and I added the fourth one. So the first piece is, how can you make your chart trustworthy? So make sure your methodology is there, sources are there. Make sure, again, as I was talking about uncertainty, confidence intervals, when you're transparent about process, that helps you gain trust. If you can open source your data, that helps you gain trust. So that's number one. The second piece is, how can you make it accessible? So, is it easy enough to understand? Am I using technical terminology that my particular targeted audience may not get? A color contrast, etc. Right? Is it colorblind friendly? So, accessibility becomes the second one. Here even annotations can help, in terms of, okay, this some charts are a little hard to read, so if you can guide the reader through that, that can also aid the accessibility question. Is it elegant, which means, is it clean, is it nice to look at? Humans like beautiful things. If it's pleasant to look at, it's more likely that somebody will give you the 2 extra seconds you deserve. And lastly, if it can tell a story, which is like, what's the point of making this chart? Why am I making this chart? Is there an insight that is attached to it? So I think these four questions sort of help us curate, or create better visualizations. Yeah, so that would be, I think, answering your question.
Thank you. Perfect. You have a framework for every question.
It's a masterclass. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Gurman, that was incredible. Honestly, I was expecting to have a nice discussion, but it felt like it was like a masterclass. So that was amazing. We're going to post this on the blog post, and I'm sure it's going to be useful for a lot of people. So thank you so much. I hope you're also a teacher because you have so much to share.
These are decks from my teaching only. So
Okay.
I don't teach full time.
Yeah.
I teach like at least one workshop every month. And that's it.
Okay. Well, they're
Yeah.
very lucky. Are
No,
you
I do
advertising those?
enjoy it.
Do you advertise
Yeah,
them
is
online?
it
Is there
available
some?
online?
Yeah.
Not
Can you
yet.
post about it? Okay.
No, not yet. I don't do public classes at the moment. At the moment, mostly it's either for colleges or corporations, organizations, non-profits, things like that. So just organizational trainings or educational, but those are few. Mostly it's organizational, or at events and stuff. Planning at some point, maybe Q3, for doing like a more public workshop that people could sign up for or something. Yeah.
Yeah. public utility, that would be
We'll be there.
yeah, I would definitely register.
It's
Thank
just
you.
a lot of work, so that's
Yes, it
why.
is for sure.
So that's why. That's why. But I
Yeah.
do enjoy teaching, which is why I keep some time every month to do some of it.
Thank you so